There exists one cinematic relic Clint Eastwood categorically avoids discussing, not because it vanished at the box office, it thrived. Not because he felt embarrassment regarding his portrayal, he didn't. Rather, something transpired behind the camera that etched a scar even he refuses to articulate. A production captured during the zenith of his skyrocketing popularity that he now treats as a total nonentity. So what precisely occurred on the set of this discarded 1970 Western? And why, over 5 decades later, does Eastwood still maintain a refusal to ever revisit it? Before Clint Eastwood ascended as one of Hollywood's most foundational icons, a performer whose mere squint could command a frame, he was simply another nameless face struggling through the fringes of the industry. Long before the tailored suits, heavy revolvers, and immortal quips, he was Clinton Eastwood, Jr., a tall adolescent maturing during the bleakest stretch of the Great Depression. Born in 1930 within San Francisco, Eastwood's formative years were defined by financial turbulence. His father, a metal worker, migrated the family, constantly seeking employment, pulling young Clint from various California municipalities. These weren't opulent times. Early years. Eastwood matured tall, reticent, and resilient, not through some cinematic intuition, but because he lacked alternatives. Survival took precedence, and that pragmatic toughness would eventually become the foundation of his cinematic identity. After high school, no dramatic academies or theatrical auditions awaited him. Instead, Eastwood navigated a long sequence of physical labors: logger, hay baler, fueling station clerk, steel technician. He once excavated swimming pools to survive. There appeared no obvious trajectory toward Hollywood, and nobody was shouting his name. But destiny possesses a peculiar mechanism. In 1951, Eastwood was conscripted into the U.S. Army and stationed at Fort Ord. He avoided battlefield action, but what he discovered was potential. Fort Ord happened to be a nexus for emerging Hollywood professionals. Performers, acting instructors, and prospective directors traversed those corridors. And Eastwood, with his commanding stature and collected poise, was clearly observed. Following his service, he secured a screen test at Universal Pictures. His initial outings were, by most interpretations, rigid and clumsy, but his aesthetic, looming, rugged, with that gaze that suggested he could penetrate stone, was undeniable. He was cast in several forgettable projects, frequently appearing as background cowhands or mute background actors. Hollywood didn't comprehend his utility yet. That shifted in 1959 when he was hired as Rowdy Yates in the television epic Rawhide. Initially, it looked like another secondary contract, but something shifted. Week after week, audiences remained captivated, and they couldn't avert their vision from Eastwood. His character wasn't the protagonist, but he exuded a primal intensity that subtly dominated every frame. Suddenly, Eastwood was more than a background figure. He was a force. Rawhide forged him into a television celebrity, but it remained a restricted path. Eastwood was hungry for more. He was tired of being instructed how to stand, how to speak, how to perform. And then, exactly when most stars would embrace a secure TV livelihood, Clint Eastwood embraced a gamble that transformed cinematic history. He accepted a bizarre low-budget Western being shot in Spain. The filmmaker barely spoke English, the compensation was minimal, the venture sounded precarious, even absurd. But the part, a mute, nameless mercenary with a homicidal glare, was precisely the sort of persona Eastwood knew he could inhabit. That movie was a fistful of dollars. What ensued was theatrical transubstantiation. For a few more dollars, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly finalized the prestigious Dollars trilogy and converted Clint Eastwood from a TV rancher into a global archetype. He wasn't just a celebrity, he became the avatar of the modern Western, bleaker, visceral, stripped of traditional morality. But with notoriety came irritation. Despite his mounting prestige, Eastwood still submitted to studios, filmmakers, and executives who didn't entirely comprehend what he contributed to the image. He was trapped between two personas, the stoic vigilante the public adored, and the craftsman craving artistic autonomy. That friction would eventually peak in a venture he'd later endeavor to suppress, and that venture was Two Mules for Sister Sarah. By 1970, Eastwood was soaring. The Dollars trilogy had turned him into a planetary sensation, and fans couldn't get enough of his glacial stare and chilling, calculated aura. He was the man who spoke sparingly, but communicated everything through a tense muscle. His brand was untouchable, and Hollywood was finally beginning to handle him like a premier star. So when Two Mules for Sister Sarah reached his desk, it appeared advantageous from every perspective. It was a Western, his essential territory. It contained a socio-political edge with a narrative linked to the French occupation of Mexico, just enough historical weight to distinguish it. It was helmed by Don Siegel, a filmmaker Eastwood admired and would subsequently partner with repeatedly, and his partner, Shirley MacLaine, one of the most honored and energetic stars in cinema. Strategically, the project should have been a flawless match. The setup was eccentric but intriguing. Eastwood would play Hogan, a grimy American soldier of fortune working south of the border, who saves what seems to be a Catholic nun from a violent encounter with outlaws. She's enigmatic, acidic, and obviously concealing secrets. Together, this mismatched pair travels through perilous lands, eluding French battalions and insurgents alike. With hostility waiting at every bend, it possessed all the ingredients of a cross-genre success, part frontier adventure, part odd couple comedy with shades of passion and covert politics. The spark between Eastwood's jagged stoicism and MacLaine's explosive vitality was intended to be the engine of the narrative.
Universal Pictures held massive expectations. Eastwood was becoming a commercial magnet, and MacLaine added artistic prestige. But from the second production initiated, something felt misplaced. The frequency was never quite balanced. Was it a farce, a parody, a grim combat drama? No one seemed certain. The dialogue attempted to blend comedy with grit, satire with ferocity, but it didn't resolve cleanly. For Eastwood, who championed sparse-centered narratives and psychological honesty, the movie's erratic rhythm and peculiar script were annoying. He was attempting to construct a legacy on realism and suspense, but Two Mules for Sister Sarah drifted too deep into kitschy mockery. Behind the curtain, conditions deteriorated. The rapport between Eastwood and MacLaine, vital to the story's triumph, was anything but peaceful, and it was nearly becoming one of the most agonizing working environments of Eastwood's whole career. Clint Eastwood isn't famous for losing his composure. Throughout his multi-decade journey, he's earned a status for stillness under duress, the professional who arrives, hits the mark, and ignores the chaos of others. But on the set of Two Mules for Sister Sarah, even Eastwood couldn't mask his irritation. The reason? The culprit, Shirley MacLaine. MacLaine was a celebrated artist, fearless, vocal, and profoundly dedicated to her process. She injected massive energy into every character, and she wasn't hesitant to confront a director, alter dialogue, or litigate how a sequence should be executed. That methodology might have functioned with different performers, but Eastwood was her antithesis in every regard. He was economic, internal, instinctive. He didn't practice out loud. He didn't dissect a scene endlessly. He simply inhabited the man, silent, coiled, lethal. From day one, their contrasts were glaring. MacLaine's dominant, occasionally melodramatic technique grated on Eastwood, who perceived her as erratic and suffocating. For her part, she allegedly viewed Eastwood as too wooden, too trapped by his persona, hesitant to explore or to provide her the theatrical energy she desired. Their personal friction started infiltrating their on-screen chemistry, and not in a helpful way. Hostility grew rapidly. They fought over positioning, over atmosphere, over phrasing. Even filmmaker Don Siegel, who would eventually become one of Eastwood's nearest allies, labored to harmonize their clashing personalities. At one juncture, Eastwood quietly labeled the film as miserable. Coming from an individual as notoriously laconic as Eastwood, that conveyed everything. It wasn't a shouting match or a public explosion that tainted the venture. It was the unrelenting friction, the slow-cooked collision of pride and creative philosophies. Every shot became a debate. Every second felt like labor. For Eastwood, who prioritized speed and directness on set, the ordeal was draining, and it would leave an impression he never fully moved past. Creative autonomy is paramount to a creator like Clint Eastwood, and while Two Mules for Sister Sarah might have appeared like a narrative sandbox on paper, the resultant movie was anything but pleasing to him. One of Eastwood's primary grievances was the story's frequency. It couldn't identify what it wanted to be. Was it a brutal Western with human stakes, a cynical political fable, or a playful buddy comedy with gunplay? To Eastwood, it felt like a fragment of everything and a whole lot of nothing. The tonal instability damaged the entire narrative. Then came the reveal, the one designed to provide the film its edge. MacLaine's persona, Sister Sarah, wasn't a nun at all. She was a courtesan masquerading as a sister for safety during the mayhem of conflict. Theoretically, it was intended to be ingenious, a moment that subverted assumptions, but Eastwood detested it. To him, the pivot felt contrived, almost farcical. It didn't enrich the narrative, it diminished it. The discovery didn't benefit the individuals or the character journey. It merely inserted a layer of cynicism that conflicted with the peril and gravity the movie was attempting to build. It was the sort of trickery Eastwood had zero tolerance for. Even aesthetically, the movie failed the test. The camera work lacked the desolate grandeur of Sergio Leone's epics. The assembly was choppy. The final product, in Eastwood's perspective, lacked the dirt, honesty, and gravity that made a Western impactful. More than anything, Two Mules for Sister Sarah signaled to Eastwood something he loathed, being powerless. He wasn't helming, he wasn't molding the narrative. He was still, at that stage, a mercenary, reciting another's words, walking another's trail, and it was evident. By the time the production concluded, Eastwood wasn't just finished with the movie, he was finished with that iteration of himself.
The quiet chapter. It's the silent chapter, the clumsy side note, a film created by a performer who had not yet evolved into an auteur and who refuses to glance backward. Clint Eastwood has constructed one of the most celebrated legacies in Hollywood record, not simply because of the characters he inhabited, but because of the ones he abandoned. And Two Mules for Sister Sarah became the movie that signaled the end of his passivity and the start of his authority. After that ordeal, Eastwood no longer collaborated simply because a producer phoned. He became calculated, purposeful. He selected ventures that synchronized with his changing identity as a creator and narrator. Parts with gravity, narratives with silence, personas that communicated through deeds, not dialogue. He didn't follow fashions, he established them. And along the way, he demonstrated something unique, that creative evolution occasionally necessitates dismissal, not of others, but of your former identity. The version that remained silent, cooperated, accepted the paycheck, and prayed it would succeed. Two Mules for Sister Sarah wasn't a disaster. It turned profit. It featured icons. For many, it's even a nostalgic favorite. But for Eastwood, it symbolized everything he never intended to be again, a man with no authority in how his narrative was presented. And maybe that's why he avoids revisiting it, because for him, it wasn't merely a film, it was a lesson. In the massive collection of Clint Eastwood's artistry, from gunslinging epics to prestigious dramas, Two Mules for Sister Sarah stands isolated, not because it crashed, but because it no longer aligns with the saga of the creator Eastwood became. It's the specter of a character that didn't belong to him, a portrayal that didn't mirror his gut, a partnership that shoved him in paths he never intended to travel. and it became the mute signifier that authority, genuine artistic authority, isn't bestowed, it's seized. So when Clint Eastwood refuses to re-watch that specific film from 1970, it's not from embarrassment, it's because he's already gathered everything he required to. Once was sufficient. The remainder of his journey, the trophies, the masterpieces, the myth, was constructed by stepping away from that iteration of himself. And perhaps that's the genuine narrative. Not why he won't observe it, but why he never had.